Right, The Real Face of Atheism by Ravi Zacharias, Goodreads.com. The Real Face of Atheism. Atheism is a world without God. Its true nature, whether disguised in Eastern mysticism or American cynicism, is despair. In his thought-provoking and witty book, Ravi Zacharias provides Christians a clear apologetic for their faith. More. Formerly published as A Shattered Visage, The Real Face of Atheism systematically examines atheistic positions on human nature, the meaning of life, morality, the first cause, death, and more, with a new introduction and revisions throughout. The Real Face of Atheism as the perfect text for pastors, students, and thinking laypeople who want to improve their apologetic skill and reach out to non-believers. Get a copy, blah, blah, blah. Patrick rated it. Right, we're going to read. What a terrible book. There are so many errors in this book and so many holes in his arguments that I don't even know where to begin. The whole book is basically an ad hominem attack on atheism, as the points he attempts to address have no bearing on the validity of atheism, as they're not ideas inherent in atheism. Chapter 1 is dedicated solely to attacking Nietzsche and erroneously attempting to connect his writings, and of course by extension atheism, with various genocides of the 20th century. Even if atheism had caused these tragedies, and it did not, that would still have no bearing on its validity, as it does not affect whether or not any gods exist. Chapter 2 is laughably devoted to debunking evolution. I don't think I really need to say much about this other than that Zacharias demonstrates a laughable understanding and ignorance of evolution, going so far as to conflate it with biogenesis, but never even talks about the scientific research in that area. Of course, here he uses the God of the gaps fallacy to say that because science doesn't yet have a theory, as if we would believe if it did, considering how life began, that it must have been God. The rest of the arguments basically boil down to, I think you need God for X, therefore you need God for X, and atheism can't give us X, which is not true. And again, even if it were, it would not have any bearing on whether there is a God, gods or not. Arguments like atheists have no basis for morality and death sucks, and atheism can't give you comfort for it, therefore God. He constantly makes statements and gives no evidence or data to back them up, like atheists can truly be happy, using atheist philosophers who suffered emotional problems as evidence. He often quotes Christian apologist philosophers as though that is evidence. He also often sets up criteria by which ideas must be judged, try to say atheism does not pass these, and that his own beliefs cannot stand up against. This guy does a good job of going through some of the book's bullshit. Oh wow, that'll be interesting to read. In an attempt to challenge my intellect, I decided to read A Shattered Visage. Although I appreciate the effort, Zacharias shows that he does not grasp the true implications of the most important statements of atheism. He only touches the surface of the main issues he discusses. In an attempt to challenge my intellect, I decided to read A Shattered Visage. Although I appreciate the effort, Zacharias shows that he does not grasp the true implications of the most important statements of atheism. He only touches the surface of the main issues he discusses very lightly. When I finished the book, I was very disappointed, for I'd hoped that a Christian intellectual like Zacharias would be able to challenge me. The main point Zacharias is trying to make with this book is that although atheism refutes God, it does not give any alternatives regarding the meaning of life, or why we are even here on earth in the first place, and the fundamentals we should base our morality on. When Zacharias states that according to atheists life has no meaning, he is absolutely right, but he is completely erroneous when he demands an alternative. He fails to recognize that meaninglessness is an option, which is a major flaw in this book. What the implications of meaninglessness are is an interesting area for debate, and I had hoped he would have addressed this, instead of stating that because there is a lack of meaning proves that atheism is wrong. When Zakaria tries to discuss the origin of life and the universe, clearly shows this lack of knowledge about science of evolution, blah blah blah. Where's the infidel thing? Patrick rated it infidels. That colossal wreck. The secular web. That colossal wreck. A review of Zacharias's A Shattered Visage, The Real Face of Atheism, 1997, by Doug Kruger. Addressing those colossal misunderstandings, or a response to Doug Kruger. But it doesn't seem to be there. Zacharias's A Shattered Visage, The Real Face of Atheism, is an unsuccessful attempt to refute or discredit atheism. He concentrates on some of the more pronounced problems with atheism as he perceives them, and in the course of this review, I will show why some of his approaches fail. I say some because I will address only the most salient errors. A thorough refutation of all of the mistakes in his 200-page book would require another 300 pages or more, as these sorts of things are short in the telling and long in the refuting. Incidentally, the title of Zacharias's book is taken from Shelley's poem Ozymandias, in which a statue of a great king is described. The statue is fallen and broken, and its face is the shattered visage, suggestive, according to Zacharias, of the fallen greatness of atheism. The title of my review is too taken from that poem. Zacharias ignores atheism and attacks atheists. In the first chapter, Morticians of the Absolute, Zacharias quickly demonstrates the futility of his endeavour. His target is, presumably, atheism. Atheism denies the truth of the theistic claim that God exists. In order to refute atheism, one would think that what would be needed would be a demonstration of the truth of theism, or a refutation of the arguments for atheism. Think again. Instead of attacking atheism, Mr. Zacharias makes the typical apologist's error of choosing a spokesperson for atheism, in this case Friedrich Nietzsche, and he proceeds to rail against various aspects of that person's philosophy, character, and influence. Unfortunately, Zacharias displays a poor understanding of all of these areas. For example, Zacharias states that Nietzschean dogma influenced Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini, and he spills a great deal of ink insisting that there is a logical connection between atheism, Nietzsche's views, World War II, and even Hugh Hefner's degradation of woman. Zacharias further elaborates on the supposed connection between Nietzsche and Hitler in chapter 3, 59 to 62, but throughout he displays a profound ignorance of several important and relevant issues. First, atheism is not the result of Nietzsche's views. There were atheists long before, centuries before, the God is Dead movement, whose proponents are those whom he calls the morticians of the absolute God, thus refuting some of Nietzsche's views, insofar as the view refuted is not the claim that there is no God, is pointless. True, Zacharias scores a lot of emotive points with those who don't know any better than to recognise an ad hominem attack on a straw man, but readers with their wits about them will just roll their eyes. What Zacharias attacks in Nietzsche's philosophy is not relevant to whether God exists. To show that atheism is false show either that God exists or that the arguments against the existence of God fail. Zacharias steadfastly refuses to do either until his first appendix to his book. More about that later. Instead of attacking atheism, Zacharias merely attacks atheists. He tries to show that some of them were unhappy, gloomy, or responsible for the immoral conducts in others. However, all of this obviously is as irrelevant as trying to show that God does not exist by attacking the moral conduct of Jimmy Baker, Jimmy Swaggart, or the latest priest to be jailed for molesting young boys. Attacking the person or his or her disposition does not attack the philosophical position, as students learn within the first 2 weeks of a college course in logic. It is also a mistake on the part of Zacharias to assume that atheists share a worldview. He often talks on the atheist worldview as if there is a particular set of beliefs which all atheists share. This is sheer nonsense. Atheism is defined by its denial of a worldview, the theistic one, not by its adherence to certain beliefs. This is another typical mistake by apologists, and Mr. Zacharias is unable to avoid this all too common blunder. As a result, as noted above, he attacks what he perceives to be the views of some atheists, but views which are not logically related to atheism itself. I know many atheists, but I know only one or two who may be fans of Nietzsche. Nietzsche is not the originator of atheism or the spokesperson for it. Much of Zacharias' criticism of atheists, then, is a waste of time. Further, it is obvious that Zacharias has not done his homework with regard to Nietzsche, so even the attacks on his influence Further, it is obvious that Zacharias has not done his homework with regard to Nietzsche, so even the attacks on his influence and character misfire. Zacharias asserts a direct logical relationship between the views of Nietzsche and the carnage caused by Hitler. He states that Hitler used Nietzsche's philosophy as a blueprint for his war, and that he took Nietzsche's logic and drove the atheistic worldview to its legitimate conclusion. 15.9. This assertion is easily disproven. Zacharias is obviously unaware that Nietzsche had contempt for Germans. Nietzsche preferred to consider himself a European. In The Antichrist, Nietzsche accused the Germans of playing a major role in inhibiting the spread of the beneficial effects of the Renaissance. Nietzsche wrote, "They are my enemies, I confess it, these Germans. I despise in them every kind of conceptual and evaluational uncleanliness of cowardice before every honest yes and no. For almost 1,000 years they have messed up and confused everything they touched with their fingers." Nietzsche was also quite clear about the fact that he detested anti-Semites. In a letter to a friend, he stated jokingly that he was having all anti-Semites shot. In The Antichrist, Nietzsche states that an anti-Semite certainly is not any more decent because he lies as a matter of principle. These and many other vitriolic attacks on Germans and anti-Semitism, nationalism, and other concepts central to the Nazi worldview, as well as occasional praise for Jewish culture and courage, show quite clearly that Nietzsche's true philosophy could not have been responsible for the worldview of Hitler, as Zacharias asserts. These are aspects of Nietzsche's writing that Zacharias would just as soon not mention, or else he is unaware of them. Probably unaware. Not being much of an expert on Ravi Zacharias, it does seem to me that he probably is lost in his own generational hermeneutical within whatever exposure he has had to the phenomena called sociological phenomena called Christianity. He may be not very clever. Hitler was unaware of them incidentally, since Nietzsche's sister, an anti-Semite herself, purged his work of anything which she believed the Nazis might find unobjectionable before allowing its publication. By that time, Nietzsche was gone and unable to protest. Thus, Hitler and the Nazis were completely unaware of Nietzsche's real views on important matters, and so the supposed link between them, of which Sicarius makes so much, is illusory. Oddly enough, Sicarius also neglects to mention that Hitler was not an atheist. In many of his speeches, Hitler asserted that he was acting in accordance with God's will. Readers may wish to consult Walter Kaufmann's popular work, Nietzsche, Philosopher, Psychologist, Antichrist, especially Chapter 10, The Master Race, for further details on the misunderstanding regarding the link between Nietzsche and the Nazis. One can hardly blame Nietzsche, for Hitler's views of Nietzsche's philosophy had to be significantly altered to fit Hitler's warped frame of mind. So even this avenue of criticism falls due to Sicarius's shoddy scholarship. Kaufmann's book, by the way, was published decades ago, and it clearly dispelled the myth that Nietzsche would have approved of the Nazis. Other works such as Ronald Hayman's Nietzsche, A Critical Life, do the same. Sicarius has no excuse for not being aware of this. I think he does. I think it's very obvious that the intention, he's looking for, he wants converts. He's just, I think another thing that a lot of these people do, one thing, I think it's probably safe to assert that, he's trying to make money, and he will be telling his truth, but his truth is not necessarily the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help us God. And isn't that ironic in this particular context? The whole comment, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help us God. People have an incredible tendency to be very biased, and we all have our prejudices. There's also the problem, and it seems to be being shown up here, when you're talking about someone like Nietzsche, do you actually know anything about them? Like, people seem to be, in my little bit of reading about, because what I'm educating myself about Ravi Zacharias, because I'm not an expert on him, the phenomena. And I'm finding it interesting. I'm finding it interesting because, I've only just recently discovered that he's dead and that he's in opprobrium. He's been alleged to have done horrible, immoral, amoral things. And, he's supposed to be a Christian pastor and, have a Christian ministry. Christians aren't supposedly supposed to be behaving like that. It's a bit sad, really. Quite sad. And I find religion quite fascinating, and it's very interesting to see what people say about it. And it's very interesting to pick on a person, a human being, and then look at how they have lived, how they have portrayed themselves, their PR, public relations, how they have moulded how other people perceive them, and then how other people perceive them. They're detractors. There are the people who are pro them, and their enemies and the detractors. I just find it very interesting. Where are we? Kaufmann's book, by the way, was published decades ago, and it clearly dispelled the myth that Nietzsche would have approved of the Nazis. Other works, such as Ronald Hayman's Nietzsche, A Critical Life, do the same. Sicarius has no excuse for not being aware of this. A beginning philosophy student would have received a failing mark for handing in such nonsense in a term paper. Before writing a book which attacks Nietzsche and which all but accuses him of starting World War II, Sicarius should have done some competent research. Similarly, other attacks on philosophers show Zacharias' ignorance of their views. He attacks Sartre for being the academic grandfather of wholesale slaughter in Africa and Cambodia, 57 to 59. That's really bizarre. Zacharias does not present any argument for the relationship between Sartre and these historical events other than to simply quote someone who mentions that 5 Cambodian leaders had studied in France in the 1950s, had joined the Communist Party there, and had allegedly absorbed Sartre's doctrines of philosophical activism and necessary violence. 58. These doctrines are not made explicit by Zacharias, nor does he mention that Sartre himself never joined the Communist Party or that Sartre was highly critical of Soviet communism. Zacharias leaves these mere assertions unsupported and undeveloped, in the hope that his readers will attribute Sartre with guilt by this unquestionable circumstantial evidence. There were thousands of professed communists in France in the 1950s, but somehow we should just blame Sartre for events which happened abroad decades later. And also he wasn't actually a member of the Communist Party. I'm not even sure Sartre was a communist himself. He may possibly have been a Marxist, whatever that means. The leaps from atheism to Sartre's political views to tragic events in distant countries, all this requires support of it is to be credible. Zacharias provides none, and of course it would defeat his purpose for Zacharias to mention other atheists such as Bertrand Russell, who were highly critical of the communists. Interestingly, Zacharias also forgets to mention that Sartre fought against the Nazis in World War II. Sartre was a POW, and he later became an active member of the French resistance. After having worked for a couple of chapters to create the illusion that atheists support Nazis, Zacharias would sooner lose a limb than reveal to his readers that atheists opposed them. Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant made his mark in the field of moral theory in his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals in 1785. Kant developed a powerful moral system which relies upon pure reason and which does not make reference to any gods. In an effort to refute Kant, Zacharias quotes novelist Iris Murdoch's assertion that the incarnation of Kant's ideal man is Milton's Lucifer, 139. On Kant's moral view, there are some principles of morals which are inviolable, keeping promises, always telling the truth, helping those in need, not killing others or oneself, and other such moral precepts are an important part of Kantian ethics. I could be a Kantian. The individual's own desires or interests take a back seat to the moral law, regardless of any undesirable consequence to oneself. I'm bored over this. B. The real missing link. The second chapter of the book is an attack on the theory of evolution. Don't give a shit. C. The wishful thinking approach, or hey, it's still better than trying to refute atheism, isn't it? Chapter 4 of Zacharias' book is about meaning in life. He tries to explain how meaningless life would be if atheism is true. Chapter 5 is about how terrible it would be if death were final. Relationships would end, hope would be abandoned, and there would be no final justice. Oh, what a load of shit. Dear God. A humanist is an atheist or agnostic who holds a set of related beliefs which form a worldview. Remember, atheism is not a worldview itself. Atheism is defined by the view it does not have, theism. Zacharias ignores the volumes of literature by humanists who celebrate the meaning they have in their lives. In Exuberance, a Philosophy of Happiness, humanist Paul Kurtz states, "Those around me seem to moan and complain, while I usually wake up singing and am joyful throughout the day. Life is so wonderful. I feel literally as if I am bursting at the seams." Readers may also wish to take a look at Bertrand Russell's The Conquest of Happiness. Many atheists are excited about living and enjoy full, rewarding lives. Zacharias does not give an accurate portrayal of the view which he pretends to attack. But not all Christians feel that life is hopeful or enjoyable. Why doesn't Zacharias quote those who believe in predestination? If you are either already saved or damned, and this is determined even before you're born, and there is nothing you can do to change that, wouldn't that weigh heavily on one's attempt to live a meaningful life? I think that might be taking it a bit far. The bug-eyed deity. The chapter with larger eyes than ours purports to be a defence of Christianity and an explanation of how it avoids the pitfalls of atheism. However, Zacharias' version of Christianity is extremely vague, and his use of the Bible is often confused and misleading. What is Christianity according to Zacharias? He talks vaguely of God's love, sin, the good news, and other broad terms, but he does not define any of them in any meaningful sense. For example, he insists that an understanding of sin is crucial to any moral theory. Until we understand what the Bible means by sin, our moral definitions will never find solutions. The problem is not the absence or education of culture, it is the presence of sin. People constantly fail to understand what sin is. Zacharias, tell us what sin is, he states. Those who recognize the nature of sin understand that what renders someone a sinner is not the scale of human wickedness, but the very nature and character of God. It is God's purity that we stand before, not a fluctuating moral code that varies from one society to another. As from the Old Testament to the New, DK, when sin is understood, a moral discussion can begin, blah, 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 blah. Zacharias seems to be trying to say that sin is the difference between our moral status and that of God. Apparently our sin lies in the fact that we don't match the moral purity of God. If that's Zacharias' point, his view is in deep trouble. First, the God of the Bible measures up to the level of a petty and vicious tyrant. The God of the Bible punishes babies for the sins of their parents. Oh, blah, blah, I've heard this shit. Oh, God. Get over it. Jesus Christ.